To protect her father's company from a man who had already decided to take it, Naomi Fairfax grabbed the arm of the nearest stranger at a Toronto charity gala and told a lie so spectacular that even she was impressed by it. She called him her fiancé. She did it in front of Gerard Payne, 3 city councillors, and approximately 60 people who would be talking about it before the valet attendants had brought their cars around. What she did not know, what would have changed everything if she had, was that the stranger standing beside her, looking mildly astonished beneath his very expensive suit, was Rowan Thorne. The same Rowan Thorne whose company had been circling Fairfax and Associates, like something that had not yet decided whether to eat or simply to watch things fall apart on their own. The evening had started badly and escalated from there. The gala was the kind of Toronto charity event where donation amounts were announced over champagne, and the lighting was engineered to make everyone look 10 years younger and considerably more generous than they were. Naomi had come because her father, Edmund Fairfax, had insisted on attending, and she had come with him because she had been watching him closely for 3 weeks. He had been sleeping badly. He had stopped finishing his coffee. He had a way, when he thought no one was looking, of staring at documents on his desk with the expression of a man reading a letter he had already memorized. She had been right to worry. She spotted Gerard Payne approaching her father just before 9 o'clock. Gerard was the kind of man who moved with great confidence through rooms that belonged to other people, which was fitting. Because most of his career had been built on acquiring things that did not quite belong to him. He was a city infrastructure consultant, with an impressive client list and a reputation for getting permits approved in record time. The last part was what had quietly interested legal investigators for the past year. None of this was public, but Naomi had done her research. What she saw, stepping closer, was her father removing a folded set of papers from his jacket pocket, with hands that were not entirely steady. She moved before she thought about it. That was the problem with Naomi, her younger brother Percy had always said. She had very good instincts and very bad timing, and together those two qualities created a specific kind of chaos. She crossed the room and took hold of the arm of the man standing closest to her, alone near the east wall, a glass of sparkling water in hand, the self-contained expression of someone who had not come here to be social. He was tall, dark-haired, somewhere in his late 30s, with the kind of posture that came not from any military background but from decades of being the most important person in most rooms. She had approximately 1 second to decide. "There you are," she said, with a warmth she manufactured entirely on the spot. "I've been looking everywhere." The man turned and looked at her with calm brown eyes that gave nothing away. "Have you?" It was not a question. She was already steering them both toward her father and Gerard Payne. "Dad," she said, arriving with a smile so bright it was almost aggressive. "Look who I found. You remember him, my fiancé." The word landed like a very polite grenade. Edmund froze. Gerard looked up. Several people nearby turned. The papers in her father's hand remained unfolded. The stranger beside her said nothing. He looked at her for one fraction of a second, a look that contained, she would later think, an entire conversation conducted in complete silence, and then he extended his hand toward Gerard with the ease of a man who had never been surprised in his life. "Rowan Thorne," he said, "a pleasure." Gerard shook his hand. His expression shifted in a way that was very small and very interesting. "Thorne Group," he said. "I wasn't aware you had any connection to the Fairfax family." "I prefer to keep my personal life private," Rowan said. "I'm sure you understand." Gerard folded his documents. He said something polite and left within 4 minutes. Edmund stared at his daughter. Naomi smiled at him. "I'll explain later," she said. "I promise." She was already counting the ways she would not be able to explain this later. She led Rowan toward the tall windows overlooking the city lights. When she was reasonably confident no one important was watching, she turned to face him. "Thank you," she said. "I haven't agreed to anything yet," Rowan said. "You said you were my fiancé. I said my name. You said the rest." He looked at her with a curiosity that was not quite friendly but not hostile either, the look of a man taking inventory. "You knew who Gerard Payne was." "Of course I did." "And you knew he was pressuring your father to sign something." "Yes." "What were the documents?" Naomi studied him. Why do you want to know? Rowan reached into his jacket and placed a business card in her hand with the precision of someone who had long since stopped wasting motion on anything unnecessary. Because I came here tonight specifically to watch Gerard Payne. And you very effectively interrupted that by making me your fiancé in front of him. Naomi looked at the card. Then she looked at Rowan Thorne. The name had been in every business headline in Ontario for the past 2 years. Thorne Group had developed half the new waterfront property east of the city. They were also, according to information, Naomi had spent 3 weeks quietly gathering in preliminary discussions to acquire the municipal contract portfolio currently managed by Fairfax and Associates. She said, very carefully, "You're trying to take my father's company." "I was considering acquiring certain contracts, yes." He did not sound particularly apologetic about it. "That situation has become complicated." "By me." "By the fact that you just told Gerard Payne we are engaged." Rowan glanced at the room. "He's already texting someone, which means whatever he's planning will move faster now. Naomi absorbed this, so I made things worse." "You made things different. Whether worse depends on what we do next." Percy materialized from nowhere, as he often did, carrying 2 glasses of wine and wearing the expression of a man who had recently witnessed something extraordinary and was trying not to show how much he was enjoying it. He was 25, worked in graphic design, and had never once failed to find his sister's worst moments entertaining. "So," he said, handing her a glass, "fiancé." "Not now, Percy. I'm just saying, of all the men in this room." "Percy." He looked at Rowan with great interest. "Percy Fairfax, her brother." He extended his hand. "Incredible to meet you, apparently." Rowan shook it. "Apparently." Percy pulled his sister a half step away and lowered his voice. "Do you know who that is?" "Yes." "And you chose him specifically?" "I chose whoever was closest." Percy looked delighted. "That's genuinely impressive, Naomi, even by your standards." She turned back to Rowan. She thought about her father's hands on those documents. She thought about 3 weeks of bad sleep and cold coffee and a look she couldn't name but recognized the shape of. She thought about the fact that Gerard had left without her father signing anything tonight, which bought time, but not much. "What would you need," she asked Rowan, "to make this work?" Rowan's expression shifted by approximately 2 degrees. It was enough to suggest he had been waiting for exactly this question. "For Gerard to believe the engagement is real, I would need to appear with you publicly. Dinners, events, enough that anyone watching concludes I'm in Toronto for personal reasons rather than professional ones." He paused. "Gerard has been under informal observation for some time. If he believes I'm here because of you, he may become careless about the other reasons I'm here." "And what are the other reasons you're here?" "He has been falsifying inspection reports and channeling contract payments through shell companies. Several of those companies appear in filings connected to properties your father's firm manages." He met her eyes directly. "Which means your father's signature is on documents that could, if read incorrectly, implicate him in something he may or may not have done." The room felt briefly louder and then quieter. "My father," Naomi said, keeping her voice very level, "has spent 40 years building an honest business." "I know." Rowan said it without the pause that would have made it feel like concession. "Which is why I would prefer to resolve this carefully rather than quickly." She held his gaze for a moment, then 30 days. He raised an eyebrow. "That's how long you get. 30 days of a convincing fake engagement in exchange for you keeping Gerard busy enough that my father doesn't have to sign anything until I can understand what those documents actually say." She held out her hand. "Do we have a deal?" Rowan looked at her hand, then her face. Then, in a motion that was neither hasty nor reluctant, he shook it. "We have the beginning of a conversation," he said. "Close enough." She did not let herself feel relieved. Relieved was for after. They established the terms 2 days later at a coffee shop on Queen Street that Naomi chose specifically because it was nowhere near either of their offices. She brought a list. Rowan arrived 5 minutes early and looked at it with the expression of a man encountering something he didn't entirely know what to do with. "You wrote rules," he said. "I wrote guidelines," she said. "There's a difference." "Is there?" "Yes." Rules imply punishment for breaking them. Guidelines imply I'm giving you the benefit of the doubt. Percy, who had insisted on coming and had been told to sit at the next table, leaned over anyway. She doesn't actually give the benefit of the doubt that often, he offered. Just so you know. Naomi pointed at him without looking away from Rowan. Next table. Percy retreated, taking his muffin with him. The guidelines were straightforward. Rowan did not make decisions on her behalf without asking. When they were alone, there was no performance required. He did not use his position or his name to pressure her family into anything. And if at any point the arrangement created more risk than it resolved, they ended it immediately, together, by mutual agreement. Rowan read the list. He turned it over to check the back. There was nothing on the back. "These are reasonable," he said. She blinked. She had expected at least one objection. "They are. I have one addition." "What?" "If you discover something about this investigation that you think I already know, tell me anyway. Don't edit yourself based on what you assume I have access to." It was, she thought, a surprisingly specific request, the kind that came from someone who had been burned before by people keeping things back for what they believed were good reasons. "Agreed," she said. They shook hands again. Percy watched from the next table with the focus of someone who had paid for a very good seat. Edmund Fairfax had the specific reaction of a man encountering something he recognized and wished he hadn't when he met Rowan properly for the first time. He came for Sunday dinner. He was careful and appropriately formal and said nothing wrong. Edmund was quiet throughout the meal, answered questions without volunteering information. And twice, when the name Thorne came up naturally in conversation, set down his cutlery before picking it up again. Naomi watched him the way she had been watching him for 3 weeks. She said nothing, but afterward she found a reason to walk Rowan to his car, and when they were outside, she said, "He knows something about your family." Rowan kept his voice neutral. "I think so too." "And you didn't press him." "Pressing people who are already frightened usually makes them quieter." He looked at her for a moment. "I know this is frustrating. Everything about this is frustrating." "Then we're keeping even." She almost smiled. She didn't let it all the way out. The anonymous message arrived on a Thursday afternoon, through a channel connected to Rowan's firm's general inbox, addressed to him personally, no sender. 8 words. "Stop the investigation or the Fairfax girl disappears." He read it twice. He sat with it for 20 minutes in his office on the 42nd floor, with Lake Ontario visible through the glass, and he thought about Naomi, who had walked into a charity gala and remade an entire situation through sheer impulsive force of will, and about how that was an exact and specific kind of courage, and about how he had no interest in being the reason it got rewarded with harm. He called her the next morning and told her. She was quiet on the line for a moment. Then, "You're going to tell me we should end the arrangement." "I was going to suggest it, yes." Guideline 1. He paused. "Naomi, you don't make decisions for me." That was the first thing on the list. The first thing on the list was written before someone sent a threat. And the threat was sent because whoever is behind this is scared. Scared people make mistakes. That's useful to us. It's not useful to you if something happens to you. Rowan. Her voice was steady and slightly irritated, the combination she used when she was also a little frightened but unwilling to let the fear lead. "My father's signature is on documents that could ruin his name and 40 years of work. I am not stepping back from this." He was quiet for 3 seconds then. "You don't go anywhere related to this alone." "That's acceptable. And you tell me immediately if anyone approaches you." "Also acceptable." "I'm adding these to the list." Add away, a pause. "Are you genuinely that attached to the list?" "It's the most organized thing about this situation." Percy's discovery came on a rainy Friday evening, in the way Percy's contributions often came, sideways, with no warning, at the exact moment the situation had appeared manageable. He had been going through old files Edmund kept in basement boxes, birthday receipts, insurance documents, the accumulated paper of a careful man's careful life, and he had found folded between a water bill from 8 years ago and a hand-drawn map of a camping trip, a contract he didn't recognize. He called Naomi and sent her a photo. She called Rowan. The three of them sat around the kitchen table at 11 o'clock at night, and Edmund's name was at the bottom of a document that, if you read it quickly, looked like a willing transfer of certain contract management rights to a numbered company that had, they now knew, been controlled by Gerard Payne for the better part of a decade. Naomi looked at the document. She looked at her father's signature. She thought about all the things she had believed about him, and wondered briefly and terribly whether she had been wrong. Then she looked at the date. "Percy," she said, "when did you have your surgery?" Percy looked up from the corner where he'd been eating crackers and pretending not to exist. He knew the date the way he knew very few dates. He had been 18. It was a Tuesday in March. He had been at Sick Kids for 11 days. The document was signed on the Thursday of that same week. Naomi set it down. Edmund, who had been standing in the kitchen doorway for the past 4 minutes and whom none of them had heard come downstairs, said quietly, "I've been waiting to explain this for 8 years. He explained it. Gerard had come to him while Percy was in hospital. There were secondary costs, a private specialist, a waiting list that Percy didn't have time to be on. Edmund had gone to every option he could find. Gerard had been one of them. The offer had seemed like a loan. The document Edmund signed had not looked like what it was. He had been awake for 36 hours when he signed it. He had been a man with an 18-year-old son whose life was currently in a building Edmund could not afford to be angry inside of. By the time he understood what he had actually signed, months later, it was too late to undo it cleanly. Gerard had made sure he knew that. "I thought I was protecting you," he said. He was not looking at either of them, exactly. "Both of you." Naomi sat with this for a long time. Then Rowan, who had been quiet throughout, said, "Is there another copy? One that shows what you thought you were signing?" Edmund was quiet. Then Samuel Pierce made a copy. He was the notary. He said he kept it because something felt wrong. Naomi looked at Rowan. He was already thinking. She could tell by the particular stillness that had replaced his usual careful expression. "Then we need that copy," he said, "before Gerard does anything else." The weekend at the lake house was Rowan's idea, which Percy found immensely funny. Rowan had a property north of the city used primarily for client retreats, and it was a plausible location for an engaged couple to spend a weekend away. It was also far enough from Toronto that the conversations that needed to happen could happen without either of them looking over their shoulders. What no one had confirmed prior to arriving Saturday afternoon was that the main guest suite was under renovation. The caretaker, a cheerful older man named Bert, mentioned this the moment they arrived with the unconcern of someone who had already decided it was not his problem. He showed them the one usable bedroom on the second floor, said the sleeping couch downstairs had a spring issue he hadn't gotten to yet, and disappeared toward the maintenance cottage. Percy looked at the room. Percy looked at Naomi. Percy looked at Rowan. "I'll take the couch," Percy said. "Spring and all, I'm very compact. The spring won't find me." He was 5'11". Naomi turned to Rowan. "We are adults." "Unquestionably," Rowan said. "We can share a room without making it complicated." "Of course. I'm just stating that clearly." "You've stated it very clearly." There was a pause. "The room has 2 chairs," Percy offered from behind them. "Percy," they both said at the same time. He held his hands up and backed away down the hallway. The room had 1 bed, 2 chairs, and a window looking over the dock and the particular dark blue of a northern Ontario evening. Naomi arranged the pillows with such focused efficiency that Rowan watched her for a moment without speaking. "Is there a structural reason for this?" he asked. "It's a boundary. It's 4 pillows. 5, I added the one from the chair." He looked at the architecture of the arrangement. "This is extremely serious for 5 pillows. I take my sleep seriously. I'll add that to the list." Despite everything, the investigation, her father's admission, the documents, still to be located, Naomi slept. She slept better than she had in 3 weeks, which she noted with some irritation upon waking, because the most obvious explanation for it was right there beside her on the other side of a now considerably relocated pillow arrangement, and she was not ready to examine that explanation in any detail. What she was ready to do was notice, in the early gray morning light, that the distance between them had narrowed considerably and that Rowan's arm was around her in a way that suggested this had happened gradually and without either of them deciding to let it. She did not move. That was the first mistake. She lay there and looked at the ceiling, and then, because she had never been good at lying to herself, she looked at him. He was asleep. His face, without the careful composure it carried during waking hours, was unexpectedly open. She thought, privately, quickly, with no intention of saying it aloud, that he was a genuinely handsome man. More than that, he was the kind of person who was better than he appeared willing to admit. And she had found that out gradually, in the way that real things were usually found out. "I'd be in serious trouble," she said quietly, to no one, "if any of this were real." "That's useful information," Rowan said. She went rigid. He opened one eye. He looked at her with the expression of a man trying very hard not to smile and not entirely succeeding. "You were awake," she said. "I became awake." "How long?" "Long enough." She sat up. She looked at the 5 pillows now distributed in a pattern bearing no resemblance to her original design. "This is deeply unfair. I didn't plan it. Your face right now is planning something. I'm just processing new information." "Stop processing." She swung her legs off the bed. "We need to find Samuel Pierce." Samuel Pierce had passed away 2 years prior, but his daughter Odette still lived in the same town where he had practiced for 40 years. She had kept his files, she explained, because her father had believed that certain documents should survive exactly as long as necessary and not a day less. The copy was in a fireproof box. It showed clearly that Edmund had signed an agreement for a short-term personal loan, not a contract transfer. The company information on the page he had signed was not the same as the information on the page that had been filed. Someone had substituted one page for another. The handwriting on the substituted page matched a signature visible elsewhere in Gerard Payne's operational records. Rowan photographed everything. The rest moved quickly, because it had to. Gerard was hosting his firm's annual investor reception the following Tuesday, which meant his office staff would be at the venue and not at his actual building. Naomi knew this because Fairfax and Associates had managed his events for 6 consecutive years, which meant she knew the service entrance, the code on the secondary stairwell, and the fact that Gerard kept physical copies of everything he considered leverage in a locked drawer that used a key he kept on the same ring as his car fob. She explained this to Rowan. He was quiet for a moment. "You're describing breaking into his office." "I'm describing using professional knowledge of a space I've been given repeated authorized access to, at a time when I have reason to believe documents affecting my family are being held there improperly." Percy looked up from his phone. "That was impressively constructed." "Percy," Rowan said, "you're with me at the venue, visible, talkative, difficult to ignore." Percy looked genuinely pleased. "That is the role I was built for." Naomi goes in from the service side during the first hour. She knows the layout. She's in and out in under 15 minutes. He looked at her. "You take photos and you leave. Nothing else." "Agreed. And if anything feels wrong, I leave immediately." She met his eyes. "I know how to take care of myself, Rowan." "I know you do." He said it without the pause that would have softened it into something more manageable. "That's not why I'm saying it." She let that sit for a moment. Then, "I know." The gala went the way things go when everyone involved is very clear on what they're doing and why. Percy positioned himself near Gerard within 11 minutes and proceeded to be exactly as engaging and impossible to disengage from as nature had built him to be. Rowan moved through the room with the calm attention that looked, to anyone watching, like a man enjoying a pleasant Tuesday evening in very good company. Naomi was in Gerard's office at 9:17. She was out by 9:31. She had 7 photographs on her phone of documents that would, when compared with the ones Odette Pierce had kept in a fireproof box, make it very difficult for anyone to argue that Edmund Fairfax had done anything except trust the wrong man at the worst possible moment. Gerard realized something was wrong at 9:45, when he reached for his key fob and found it in the wrong pocket. He did not take it well. He took it even less well 40 minutes later, when Rowan and Naomi, and Percy, who had been nearby enough to be useful, were standing in an administrative office on the venue's second floor with a city investigator who had been waiting, quietly and patiently, for exactly this kind of evidence to surface. Gerard Payne was escorted from the building. He did not go quietly. Percy noted afterward that it was the most interesting exit he had ever witnessed, which, given Percy's general threshold for entertainment, was saying something. The order against Fairfax and Associates was suspended pending investigation. Edmund's signature on the fraudulent transfer was flagged as coerced. The numbered company was frozen. There were calls to make and documents to file, and a considerable amount of administrative work that would take months. But the immediate threat, the thing that had kept Edmund awake and his coffee cold for 3 weeks, was gone. They sat in Naomi's kitchen at midnight and said very little, because there was a particular kind of quiet that came after the thing you had been bracing for finally stopped requiring you to brace. Edmund looked 10 years lighter. Percy made sandwiches. Rowan received a call at 12:40 from his operations director in Vancouver. His head office had an urgent situation that required his presence. He needed to fly out in the morning. Naomi saw his face change when he set down the phone. She already knew from the quality of his expression what he was about to say. She had come to know his face well enough in 30 days to read it the way she read the sky in the morning. Not perfectly, not always, but more often than seemed reasonable. He found her on the back porch. The city was quiet in the particular way it got after midnight, when the noise dropped away and the lake made itself known through the distance. "Vancouver," she said before he could start. "Tomorrow morning." He paused. "I don't know how long." "Okay." He looked at her. "Naomi." "We agreed on 30 days, she said. "This is day 29, it resolves itself." "That's not." He stopped. He tried again. "I think you should know that the 30 days stopped being about the arrangement some time ago." She was quiet. "For me," he added, as though it needed clarification. "I know," she said, "for me too." He looked at her for a long moment. Then, in the careful way of someone who had spent most of their life being careful about exactly the wrong things, he said, "I should go sort this out alone." And then, "Guideline 1, Naomi said. He stopped. "You don't make decisions for me," she said. "That was the first thing on the list." "I'm not deciding anything. I'm going to Vancouver." "Without asking what I want." He was quiet for 4 seconds, she counted. "What do you want?" he asked. She looked at him. She thought about a charity gala and a very bad idea, and 30 days of guidelines and a pillow arrangement that had not survived the night, and a man who had, without announcing it, spent a month being better than he needed to be. "I want to know what flight you're on," she said, "so I can book the one after." Something shifted in his face. The careful composure he wore like a second jacket moved aside, and beneath it was something considerably less defended. "You'd come," he said, "to Vancouver. You were going to go without asking me." She raised an eyebrow. "So I'm asking myself." He looked at her for a long moment. Then, for the second time that month, he laughed. The real kind, the one that had nothing professional in it. "Naomi." "Rowan." "I think," he said, "this might be considerably more complicated than 30 days." She reached out and took his hand, which she had done in public approximately 14 times over the past month, for the purpose of convincing other people of something. This time there was no one watching. There was no purpose except the obvious one. "Good thing I'm good at complicated," she said. He held on. 6 months later, at a small dinner at the Fairfax house with Edmund and Percy, and a bottle of wine that Percy had spent an embarrassing amount of time selecting, Rowan reached into his jacket pocket with the expression of a man who was considerably more nervous than he was accustomed to being, which Naomi found, privately, one of the best things she had ever seen on his face. "I want to do this properly," he said. "You've already done it once improperly," Percy offered. "You were somebody else's fiancé for a month without being asked." "Percy," Edmund said. "I'm just noting the contrast." Naomi looked at Rowan, who was holding a small box, and looking at her with the particular directness she had come to understand was his version of having his whole heart visible if you knew where to look. "I'm not asking for a deadline," he said, "and I'm not making a decision for you." "Then what are you doing?" "I'm asking," he opened the box, "just asking." She considered it for what may have been 3 full seconds. Percy was absolutely certain it was longer. Edmund picked up his wine glass. "Yes," Naomi said. And the most impulsive, inconvenient, spectacularly ill-timed decision she had ever made in a room full of strangers turned out, in the end, to have been the truest thing she had done in years.